Hello everybody and welcome to another video. I am here to talk about my July reading. So July is a month in which I always host a readathon, which is called gamenightathon. Gamenightathon is a game-based readathon in which we tackle a board game and we have a reading game around it. This year we played Labyrinth and it was such a fun time. I am really happy with what ended up being the feeling of this readathon because I did a little bit of something new this time with just like having very sort of like open prompts that you would have to use sort of like your creative brain to kind of figure out, okay, what am I going to read for this? What can I fit into this? And I really enjoyed that experience a whole lot. And I hope you guys did as well. But so that also led to what has currently been the most successful reading month of the year, because it made me excited to see what the next prompt was going to be and to figure out what I was going to read for the next prompt, to the extent where it actually became a little bit of a chore for me to fit in one of these books. Actually, the book that I cannot talk about because I didn't finish it in July, because, you know, that just felt less exciting than picking up something that hadn't been on my plans for the month at all, just based off of these prompts. So for general stats, I normally don't share them, but while I've got this app open, I might as well. So I read a total of 3,602 pages across the month over 11 books. I mainly read dark, emotional and reflective books. Most of my books were medium to fast-paced, and the majority of them are on the shorter end. All of it was fiction, and the highest scoring genres are fantasy and LGBTQIA+. So let's just go and have a look at the books themselves. The first book that I finished in this month was that one I have physically lying here, so let me grab it. So the first book that I finished this month was A Song of Legends Lost by M.H. Allende. This is the May Illumicrate book. It is a gorgeous edition. This illustration is by Jeff Brown, who is almost immediately became my favorite illustrator. A Song of Legends Lost is the first book in a new series, and it is, for me to admit freely to it, difficult to kind of grasp the world in this one. We are following a number of POVs, and this is a world that has had like an ancient society that was working with this technology which is called tech work. They definitely are no longer around, and a part of their demise at the very least are these creatures called the Greybloods, I want to say now. Yeah, almost, impossible for me to find out apparently, but I think it's something like Greybloods. And basically within this world, only people of noble blood have the ability to call upon their ancestors in order for them to help them fight these Greybloods. And one of the perspectives that we are following, the perspective of Jinao, he is a noble-born son. However, every single time that, basically it's like a limited number of ancestors, it seems like, that you can call upon. And so when somebody passes away who had the ability to call upon the ancestor, there's a sort of ceremony for a new person to get this ability. And every single time this ceremony comes around, he is overlooked. He does not get this power. And so, but in the very beginning of this book, he is basically at this battlefield where he ends up taking the arm of one of the leaders of the Greybloods, and his brother kind of runs away with the honor of having done that, you know, with the recognition for this act. However, this Greyblood wants to fight the person who chopped off his arm, and he seems to be quite aware of the fact that it wasn't his brother, but that it was Jinao himself. So that's one of the perspectives we follow. We also follow a girl who is part of a more sort of poor part of society, who is getting around by making votive candles, and one day her brother goes missing after he has made a sort of votive that he shouldn't really be making, and trying to sell them across a different part of the city where, you know, this is sort of gang centered city, so he has crossed into basically the territory of another gang and sold his stuff there, and so he has gone missing now. And then but that perspective comes later, so probably I shouldn't introduce it now. But so I enjoyed this one a whole lot. It is like the first physical read I've done in a very long time. So it was a little bit of a struggle in that sense for me because my focusing power with physical reading just hasn't really been there. But throughout this month I've definitely reclaimed it. And so I don't know whether this book struggled a little bit because of that, because I definitely suffered a little bit with like world building and keeping the world apart and understanding the history of what came before. But a lot of this, like a big thematic running through this, is a sort of like everything you've been told is wrong type of thematic. So this book will be raising more questions than it answers, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but know that going in, because otherwise you might be left a little bit frustrated. I definitely at times didn't feel frustrated because I'm always like thinking it's me, it's not a book. I always think like, yeah, I must have not been paying well enough attention, but because I was budding reading this one, because this was the pick for the Of Queens, Witches and Valkyries book club that Sarah from A Voice Through Words runs on her Discord, I know that a lot of people were struggling with it for that reason. But I do still want to continue on because I did really enjoy the process of going through this book, and I loved 3 at least of the perspectives that we got, and then definitely some perspectives that we got in the epilogues I also loved a whole lot. So there is enough there for me to want to continue and hopefully get some more answers in the second book, and I will probably be rereading it before I go into the second book in any case, and hopefully then I will just have a clearer grasp going through it the second time of all of the different elements in this world. The next thing that I finished is something that didn't count for gamenightathon because I didn't have a ton of pages to read in it, so it was going to be negative points if I were to fit it into the readathon. So I decided not to do that. But the majority of this book I read in other months, and that is Vanishing World by Saga. Saga is one of my favorite authors. I absolutely adore Earthlings and Convenience Store Woman. However, that is not the case for Vanishing World. She also has a short story collection that I didn't really like all that much, but I'm also not a huge short story reader, so that I didn't hold against her. But this one, it just didn't work for me. So this is a story about dystopian future, or like a utopian future, where technology is advanced to such an extent that we no longer need to have physical intercourse in order to be able to create babies. And they're also in the process of creating these sort of like artificial wombs that will make it possible for men to carry babies as well. So if sex is no longer needed in order for there to be babies, the speculation of this book is that physical intercourse will start to lose its value, because its main value at this point in time is to create offspring. And so this has resulted in a society in which sex is basically kind of seen as something weird, something actually vulgar, slightly delinquent. It's kind of a taboo, and on the same extent as incest might be, and it's actually referred to as incest within this book. But our protagonist, and this is a change that has happened also like in a very short period of time, which is probably my main qualm with this concept, is that I just don't think that it would change that quickly. It's difficult for me to grasp that sex would ever just be something that we abandon because of the fact that we no longer have a practical use for it, because I think it definitely serves more than just that practical cause, but definitely the fact that over the course of one generation's opinions about this have changed so much, that is just like a little bit of a difficult one for me to overlook, first of all. And so our protagonist is somebody whose mother has still given natural birth to her, which is already something that is a little bit out of the norm, because a lot of times the people of her age have been born through this artificial insemination process. And so she is raised by this mother who still very much believes in these old values of love and physical love, whereas she might be more rebellious to those concepts because of that. So in this world, a lot of the younger kids are actually kind of relieving their sexual tension on themselves, and basically just kind of like in love with anime characters and then they feel their sexual urges rise, and then they just masturbate to get rid of those sexual urges. And so it's seen as a taboo to do anything other than self-masturbation. And so, but our character is kind of entering in sexual relationships with people around her. But this book basically just really suffers from a whole lot of repetition. That was my main issue with it. We constantly repeat the same sort of thought patterns, the same sort of reflections. And then the ending of this book, like Saga Murata is somebody who really crosses borders in order for you to be confronted with uncomfortable feelings and to examine why this leaves you feeling uncomfortable. And this is definitely one of those endings. It's very uncomfortable, it's crossing a taboo, something that is very much seen as a criminal act within our society. But the question that she's kind of raising there is, how much of a criminal act is this in a world in which there is a completely different relationship between people and their sexual urges, between sexuality and love. I definitely understand the people who also read that and then were like, nope, this, like, what the fuck is wrong with this author? But I just know that Saga Murata crosses boundaries a lot in order for us to be shocked and to elicit thought through that shock. But yeah, it is definitely a hard ending in that regard. But so yeah, for me it mainly just suffered a lot from repetition. The logic behind the world also wasn't always clear to me, or not something that I could like really understand. This can have to do with cultural differences, because this is a book written for the Japanese public, and maybe in Japanese society this is these consequences of sex no longer being necessary are more understandable. Maybe this is something that a Japanese person can more easily relate to, but with how sexualized our society is and our media is, for me it's just difficult to think that that logic would indeed come true. Next up, I read Pet by Kweki Emezi. This is a relatively short novel, so some 200 pages. It is very much sort of like speculative. So we have a kid who is living in a household with her mother and father, and her mother is a painter, and she accidentally bleeds onto the canvas of her mother's latest creation, and the canvas comes to life. And so this canvas then becomes this sort of like creature that tells her that there is a monster hiding in her friend's household. Now, monsters have been eliminated earlier within the history of this town, and currently the town is run by the angels, and there's supposedly no monsters left. And so starts a quest to find this monster in the household of her friends. I'm not gonna say more than that, it's very short, so but I thought it was I thought this one was really excellent. I adored it. It is very short, but it's also very intimate in its shortness, and looking at a harrowing, dark topic as well. Next up, I continued my Saga journey by reading volume 11 of Saga. This was a gift that I got for Christmas last year, and I don't know, maybe I should just stop reading Saga. So Saga is a comic book series in which we're following basically sort of like Romeo and Juliet in space type of story. We have two adults from opposing races. Basically they are like they inhabit the same sort of like moon, but they are like very much against one another, and one is kind of like subjugating the other. But so they fall in love with one another, but their love is kind of a story that neither race wants to see happen, because it would show that there is a possibility for reconciliation between the two races. And so they basically have to go on a run in order for them to be able to continue living together and for there to be no repercussions for their love. However, because they come out so long away from one another, I'm just not all that invested in the story anymore, and it just is like I'm more reading it like automatically. It's like, oh yeah, new Saga is out, I guess I will read it, rather than actually looking forward to continuing. So I think I need to DNF the series here. Next up, my audiobook for the month, I mean the first audiobook that I finished in the month, is The Shadow Cabinet by Juno Dawson. This is the sequel to Her Majesty's Royal Coven. I read Her Majesty's Royal Coven a few months ago, in May maybe or something like that, and I absolutely loved it. 5 stars, was absolutely swept away. This is a story about a world in which basically there is this sort of like British institution referred to as Her Majesty's Royal Coven, and we follow 4 friends who basically grew up being trained for witchdom, being part of Her Majesty's Royal Coven. One of them started her own coven at some point, one of them is now leading the coven, the other has kind of left her witchhood behind and is basically just like running a practice as a psychologist, I think it is, and the 4th one has more or less done the same. She is basically just living as a veterinarian at this point in time. However, her help is called in when this very powerful new teenage witch is discovered, who does not seem to be wanting to speak with anybody and who is prophesied to be a sort of like child that will disrupt the entire society as they know it. So our witch Neve is called into the action to try and reach out to this teenager, to try and find a way to communicate with the teenager and to calm her down and help her along the way. And yeah, things escalate from there due to this prophecy and due to people's fear about this prophecy coming true. I love this book. This book has a lot of representation. It has discussions about racism. It has discussions about trans fear, transphobia, and a whole lot of other things, of course, but those are just like the main 2 that are jumping out to me at this point in time. I absolutely love this examination of what fear does to people, this sort of us versus them mentality, and the way that ultimately fear of another will often create reactions in some people that seem out of place with their personality or with how you've known them all of their lives, and how fear can really transform a person into a hateful person, but also how this fear can result in certain like rules and restrictions that ultimately rule and restrict yourself as well. So I thought this was a really interesting read. I loved reading about these characters. I loved the character of Neve. I loved the character of cannot think of her name right now. Love the character of the little girl. Love the friendships, but also this look at friendships and the strain that they get under the longer they are around. You know, these friendships that are around from the time in which you're teenagers and when you're spending all of your time together, and you are sharing so much of your world together. You know, the media that you're consuming, the things that you're learning, the things that you're reading, the things happening around you, all of that is very similar at that point in time. There are of course individual differences, but you are sharing so much together at that point in time that, you know, your friendship is very tight. And strain can start to exist over time as your world starts to go like diverge more and more. By the time of this book, you know, they have their own families, they are spending less and less time together, and they have their own worlds all around them. And so it is about staying connected regardless of these differences in your world, but also at looking at, is there still value in keeping this relationship? Is there still value in holding on to this relationship when your worlds have gotten so far removed from one another, and when you as people have evolved further and further away from each other, and you might come to discover that, you know, some of these people have evolved into somebody who's just no longer compatible with you as a person, and about the loss of friendship in that regards. So yeah, I loved that look in Her Majesty's Royal Coven. And so the Shadow Cabinet, which I read this month, is a sequel to that book. We leave off right after the events of Her Majesty's Royal Coven, because Her Majesty's Royal Coven left off on a cliffhanger. And yeah, we go right into the second book. It was a little bit less enjoyable to me due to circumstances that I cannot talk about, but basically I was just missing a character that had been essential in the first book, and that due to circumstances was missing in the second book. And this second book was just rage bait for me. As I said, the first book is a lot, it like delves into like racism to a lesser extent. It's mainly there with one character, but a lot of transphobia, and because of that not personally being applicable to my life, it's just something that I get less like angry about. You know, I get angry about it in the concept of it, but it's a different type of anger than when something touches upon you as a person personally. And so that type of anger was definitely activated with book 2, because book 2 will be very much focused on misogyny, on this sort of like society of men that is basically aware of the existence of women and basically just out to find women where possible and drown them, bring back like the witch trials and things like that, but then also in the trials not really being like open to actually listening to the women, just like having condemned them ahead of time the way that it was already done back then. But so a lot of that type of guy energy is in this book, and my main criticism here is also that, you know, there's just no room in this book for it, but that I would have loved for a sort of like a better perspective on men occasionally, or just like a little bit more. There is not a lot of male presence within these books. It is definitely there, but a little bit more male presence would have helped this book balance out this sort of like anger towards men that is created from the male's perspectives that we are seeing a lot of, with how they are treating women, how they are thinking about women. That would have just like helped bring down that anger occasionally, but maybe that is also something that the author didn't want to do. She just wanted to induce this rage rather than just kind of de-escalate it from time to time. But that meant that my anger was very much riled throughout this experience, so to the point that it wasn't always enjoyable anymore, just because my blood was boiling. Alright, I ranted for about that so well that my battery was dying. Next up, I finished The Eight by Joanna Miller. In principle, not a good book to read after having read The Shadow Cabinet, because I thought it was going to be as rage-inducing, but this one wasn't as rage-inducing, so it was actually, I think, the perfect combination with it, because this is a book about the first women who enter Oxford University with the knowledge that they'll walk away with a university degree. Because basically women had been allowed to take classes at Oxford. I don't remember the full timeline, it is here inside the book as well, but basically women had been allowed to take classes, but they didn't get a degree. Even if they took all the classes needed for that degree the same way as their male peers did, then they didn't get an actual degree given to them. And it seems like Oxford is actually one of the last universities to allow women to matriculate. And so at the start of this book, it has just been put into rule that women can matriculate, they can get their Oxford degrees, and so these women that are entering at that point in time are the first women who enter into university knowing that they get the degree at the end of it. And so we're following 4 women who have had different experiences throughout the war. One of them was, for example, a taxi driver, like not a taxi driver, like an ambulance driver throughout the war. One has lost her father and her fiance to the war. One I don't think has really an experience with the war, but she is taking care of her father, who is a pastor, and so she's helping him out most of the time. And so for her, getting this degree is quite difficult because she has to return home quite regularly to help him out as he is kind of aging. And then the other one is the daughter of a famous suffragette who's kind of dealing with struggles of self-doubt and of self-confidence, as her mother is a sort of like radiant, confident person, a go-getter, but she's also super harsh on her daughter, and her daughter can do no good in her eyes neither. And so we follow these four women throughout their first year at Oxford. And throughout the book, originally I wasn't fully invested, you know, I was expecting it to look way more at the misogyny of their situation, because most of the guys at university definitely were kind of angry about the decision that was made. They felt like it was a devaluation of an Oxford degree if women were also allowed to get it, and so they definitely had to deal with some unhappy circumstances, but it didn't really fill up the book with these types of stories to the extent where you would then like feel just like super angry at men and what these women had to go through. They definitely had difficulties, but a lot of these difficulties were actually coming from very strict rules that were being imposed on them, and I understand their need for these rules is because that they had to be perfect. They could not slip or slide or, you know, like showcase the same type of student behavior that their male peers were showcasing, because they would absolutely be punished for that, and not just them personally, but it would make people go, see, this is why women cannot have university degrees, this is just corrupting our women, and it would make people rethink these thoughts, rethink these rules, these new opportunities that were handed to women. So they basically had to walk this perfectly straight, narrow line in order to ensure that this right would remain for women. But so this is there in the book, but it's basically sort of like more in the background. We're definitely zooming in on these women themselves and look at these four women that were some of the first at Oxford University. And as we get towards the second half of this book, I definitely sort of saw myself having gotten to know these characters so well that I was also feeling for them, wishing them well, hoping to see them succeed in their endeavors. And so it became a different type of book, a book in which you were just like there living with your characters, urging them on, and less of a sort of like examination of misogyny at that point in time and the obstacles that they had to overcome, which is what I kind of expected going into it. But so yeah, I really enjoyed it by the end. It was a book that was different from what I had expected going into it, but nevertheless it convinced me with what it actually turned out to be. The Eighth was actually also a book that I had purchased so a few days before I finally got around to reading it, and the same is true for this one, because I also bought it that same day. So I bought 4 books that day, and 2 of those I've already finished within the same month of buying them, so love that for me. But so Hunchback by Sayu Ichigawa is a book translated from Japanese. It is a book by a disabled woman, and it is about a disabled woman who has a congenital muscular disease for which she needs to be on an inhaler at all time because of mucus piling up in her esophagus. Aside from that, she also has muscular weakness, but she is a woman who is well off, and as a consequence she can afford a very good home. Basically her parents have bought the home, it is in her ownership now as her parents have passed away. She is spending her time writing erotic fiction, which she donates the proceeds from to a charity, I believe. So her erotica writing is just a way of expressing herself, a way of being able to inhabit this sexual personality, this sexual persona that people don't associate disability with. People look at a disabled body and sexuality and sexual urges is kind of what they expect to not be there, as if a disabled woman cannot cannot feel sexual desire, and this makes her want to write erotica, and dirty erotica, definitely at that. But she's also constantly texting out these tweets full of like dark desires, these preposterous thoughts, these wild, inappropriate thoughts. For example, one tweet reads that she wants to get pregnant because she wants to be able to abort a child, and a sort of tense interaction occurs between her and one of her caretaker who has read these tweets. Now, this is a book that is very short. Is very thought-provoking, because originally I was just like, oh, I don't know if I'm liking this because of like these tweets and the erotica. It just felt sort of like very base and, you know, uncomfortable. But that is, of course, like Saga, what the author is trying to show. She's trying to show you, first of all, that disabled people are like just as wide as normal people, you know, like we exist in many different sizes and shapes. This character is very much the sort of like antithesis of what people think of as a disabled person. She is rich and she is highly sexual. So two things that are not easily associated with disability in the sort of like stereotypical view that a lot of people have of disability. And so this book is kind of examining our views on disability, kind of trying to show a very different side to that. But there's also this explosive ending towards this book, and this ending that kind of makes you rethink everything that has come before, makes you question what was real and what was like imaginative. And I've read afterwards that there is an event that took place in Japan a few years before the publication of this book that closely mirrors the an end act that takes place within this book, making me think that this book is probably written in reaction to that event. I would have to look at some interviews with Sayu Ishikawa to see if that is true, but that definitely also made me reappreciate this book in a new light. So, food for thought with this book, and it is only 97 pages or something like that. It is under 100 pages, so it is a quick read, and it is, in my opinion, one that, even though, as I indicated, a lot of the experience I was like, oh, what am I reading, and I don't know whether I'm liking this or not, I definitely think that it is very thought-provoking at the very least, and an interesting one to discuss, for example, in with somebody who has read it. Next up, I read The Sapling Cage by Margaret Killjoy. This is a sort of like YA book with trans representation. We are looking at a trans girl who basically isn't out at the beginning of the book, like her friends and her family members know, but like she is still presenting as boy to society. But her dream has definitely been to become a witch one day. However, witches are all women. However, her friends is actually promised to the witches, so at one point in the near future witches will be coming to their town in order to take her away and train her to become a witch, which she definitely doesn't want. She actually wants to become a soldier. So they come up with this plan where the protagonist, Laurel, is going to take her friend's place. She's going to start presenting as a girl and going to pretend to have been born a girl as well, in order for her to be able to be trained by the witches, while her friends can then go off and train to become a soldier. And so this story is filled with sort of like tension because of Laurel having to hide her origins, having to hide that she was not born a girl the way that the rest of the witches around her were. And these fears kind of increase as she comes to see the power of the witches and comes to fear what the witches will actually do to her if they were to ever find out that she has boy parts, basically. And but the story is about more than that as well, because there's tension within this whole society that is starting to arise because of a blight that is ruining the landscape around them. And this blight is being attributed to the witches by some people in society, and so witches are having to defend themselves against certain bands of soldiers, and tensions are definitely rising at the top of the power chain within the society at this point in time. So the witches are definitely also desperately trying to find out the source of the blight and trying to find a way to stop it. So it's a story about discovery, about coming into your own, about learning to stand up for yourself, about learning to be your actual self and finding the right people with whom you can be yourself, while at the same time having this story about, you know, the blight, corruption going on in the background. But so yeah, I enjoyed it, but I've already kind of also indicated in my reading vlog, I enjoyed it, it was a good read, I had a good time with it, but it's not necessarily one that, you know, I'll remember forever, or that is like a new favorite, and that is also perfectly fine. But so yeah, just as a sort of like weighing up the books in my reading life, this one is just like okay, I had a good time with it, but it's one that will not leave a lasting impression in that regard. Next up, for Camp Enchanted, I read Summer Vamp by Violet Chan Karim. This is a graphic novel about a girl who's sent off to a cooking camp. Her father has just, her father has had a new girlfriend for a while, and they have just communicated to his daughter that they are planning to like move in together, so that this woman who she has accepted to her life, but as sort of like her father's boyfriend, will now actually become a permanent part of her life and will be permanently there when she is at home. And so she has to struggle with those feelings, but she's sent off to a summer camp as a sort of like treat to her because she loves cooking, and so they sent her to a summer cooking camp. However, she gets on the wrong bus and ends up on a camp that doesn't seem to feature cooking at all, and slowly but surely she starts to realize that it is actually a camp filled with vampires. I love this one. Yeah, as I said with the previous one, it's a good read and I enjoyed it, but it's like not gonna be like top of my new favorites, but I definitely think it's a fun little read. It's very short as well, so you can easily go in through it, but it's very much a story about coming into your own and learn to stand up for yourself, because Maya, the protagonist in this story, is very much somebody who is always second guessing what she says, and so is very much a quiet person who takes a lot of time to respond because she's very worried about what people would think about her, about people finding her weird, and so people actually tend to speak over her, speak for her, and this is a story in which we see her kind of learn to get comfortable with people around her and learn to open up to them and be her true self around them. Next up, I listened to Clown in a Cornfield by Adam Cesare. This was an experience for me because this book is basically about a girl who moves to a small town after her mother passes away in Philadelphia. Her father can no longer stand to be in that environment. He is an emergency room doctor, and his wife passed away from an overdose basically, and so he cannot stand seeing similar cases enter anymore, and so he wants to escape the rush of that life and being confronted with those situations on a very regular basis. And so he takes Quinn into this sort of like small town, Kettle Springs it's called, to start a new life there, as the doctor there has just retired. Now Quinn basically enters into this new school. He's immediately kind of targeted by one of the teachers for laughing at an inappropriate moment, and is immediately aware of some sort of like tension that exists between this local band of like 4 or 5 teenagers and the adults and authority figures around them. And things start to escalate as we have a killer clown. Now, I have somewhat of a trauma about killer clowns. The clown of It's is a clown that's like I definitely don't have fond memories of, just because my sister was always like covering my eyes whenever something scary would happen in the movie. But I have a really vivid imagination, so my imagination made things way worse than they actually were. When I finally watched it, it wasn't as creepy as I thought it was going to be, just because I'd imagined some really creepy stuff instead. And then this clown is also like silent, the way that Mike Myers in Halloween is, which is another one of my traumas. So the original few times in which we have a scene where a clown is killing somebody were really not for me. I was really just like super tense on the bicycle because I listened to this on my commute. Just really like tense and imagining a lot of stuff in my mind, which I don't tend to do a lot when reading. I don't tend to have like vivid images in my mind, but I definitely was having them at that point in time. However, like at some point in time it got less creepy due to circumstances which I'll not explain because they're like spoiler filled. But so it became less similar to It or Halloween, and to that extent I was able to deal with the book a lot better. I had a good time with this one, I definitely did, but I don't know whether I want to continue on or not, because I always feel like this type of book, I go into it for like considering it as a standalone story, and I don't know whether I will want to read the sequel or not, because a lot of times with these types of stories I feel like sequels are actually like a little bit disappointing. Now, I've never read a horror sequel, so potentially that will be better, but when it comes to like horror sequel movies, that always just feels like, you know, repetition, and so I don't tend to enjoy it. So I don't know yet whether I'm gonna continue with the series or not, but I definitely do think that, as indicated in that vlog in which I was reading it, that I will probably be doing a horror month in the month of October, because I haven't really read horror often, and I'm always wanting to kind of occasionally give it a go, but every time that I think about picking one of these up, I'm like, yeah, I'll pick that up in October, but then in October it doesn't happen. So I think I do want to, this year, make sure that in October I at least spend like maybe just like one vlog on horror, but at least that, but hopefully a lot more. And then the final thing is a success story, because this is a book that I started in May that I still needed to finish, and that is Honor by Elif Shafak. So Elif Shafak is probably my favorite author. This is the 5th book by her that I'm reading. It did take me 2 months, but that mainly to do with priorities. There were other stuff that were, or like other books that were claiming my priorities over this one, so I probably just picked it up at the wrong time. I picked it up for Magical Readathon because it fit a prompt, but it was always sort of like lower in my priorities compared to my other reads, and then it's also looking at a little bit of a harsh thematic that I will vaguely call upon within this description. But so in this one we are following basically a family. It is a family who relocated from Turkey, yes, from Turkey to London, and we are looking at the perspectives of the different families. So father, mother, aunt, and then the 3 children that came out of this marriage. And so it is a story looking at family honor, and specifically the way in which women are bound by family honor, and women behaving in a way that isn't seen as appropriate by the men in their lives impacts the entire family honor and the ways that men feel like acting in reaction to these behaviors. So we know early on a certain act that has taken place within this family as a consequence of a woman's guilt. But the story is told achronologically, from times like in the beginning, especially you'll have a few present day perspectives before going back into the past, but you're jumping back and forth, and you're not always jumping to the same point in the past. You might be jumping back to, let's say, 10 years ago, you might be jumping back like 50 years ago. I don't know, it might be too far, but in any case you're like jumping around, creating a sort of like tapestry of these different moments that builds a full personality and a full scope of who these people are and what their motivations are, but also of like the beautiful moments and the dark moments of certain characters. None of these characters are perfect characters. You're seeing their positives, you're seeing their negatives, you're seeing their highs, you're seeing their lows, you're seeing connection, you're seeing dissonance. Yeah, it's just a powerful book that I gravely enjoyed. It took me a long time, and I took time to, like, it took me a long time because I took lots of time away from it a lot of the time, you know. I read a little bit in it in May, but I do believe that I was only able to start at the very end of May, so I also didn't read a whole ton of it in May. Then I read a little bit in June, took a huge break from it, got back to it now, but in spite of taking so many absences from this book, I was able to always reconnect to these characters very easily and re-center myself in the story very easily, in spite of, you know, like none of the actions being like rehashed or refreshed for me neither. But yes, I love this one a whole lot. It's quite high on my Alicia Fack ranking, which maybe I should also do. But so yeah, that is my reading for the month of July. As indicated in the beginning, I did also read The Veiled Throne by Ken Liu, but I only got to 53% into that one, so over 500 page mark, but this is a 900 plus page book, so my thoughts on that will be in the August wrap up. But so yeah, with that I'm going to end this video finally, because I think it's going to be a very long one. Hope you enjoyed it nonetheless, and see you guys for the next video. Bye!